welcome to the Thursday, January 13th, Webster Town Board Workshop. We have two agenda items tonight, and we're starting out with our Human Resources Director, Brayton Connard, is going to give us an update on the OSHA ETS situation and also the New York State of Emergency and Governor Hochul's mask or approved vaccination. Before I hand the baton to Brayton, I just want to say that we've been chuckling, Brayton, that when we decided to do the update today, it was probably 8 or 9 days ago.
Correct.
And I said, Brayton, if I were you, I wouldn't even start preparing for that update till about 2 o'clock on Thursday, because this thing is changing by the hour. And that ended up being sage advice, huh?
Yes, Mr. Supervisor, that was excellent advice. The topic is COVID. There's 3 sections to it. The OSHA ETS, the New York State indoor mask mandate, and modifications to the isolation quarantine rules. As you alluded to, I did start my preparation at around 11 o'clock this morning and finished it up. And then I got a text from you announcing that the Supreme Court had made a ruling in the case. And so then I had to go back and make some adjustments to my briefing. So for the OSHA ETS, I thought I'd kind of go through kind of basically the timeline of where we're at, which is in September, President Biden announced that he had an intention to impose a vaccine mandate on large employers. But it wasn't until November 5th that OSHA released the rules, the ETS, Emergency Temporary Standard. Employers were only given 30 days in which to devise, adopt, and distribute a policy and to obtain the vaccine status of all employees. And this coincided over the Thanksgiving week was in there, and that made some of our communication and deliberations complicated. After that, 30 days later, was supposed to be the implementation of the either mandatory vaccination or the mandatory mask and test protocols, and that was going to fall over the Christmas and New Year's holiday, another banner time for communicating with employees and decision makers. 2 months ago, I was here letting you know about the OSHA ETS once we determined that it would apply to the town of Webster. Initially, I did not think it would, but my understanding was corrected. And so that was November 12th. A number of lawsuits were initiated, and around 11/28, the town distributed a OSHA ETS compliant policy and began collecting vaccination statuses. Within 48 hours, though, the town did some further legal analysis and decided that there was a stay on OSHA, and also PESH had not weighed in. And so based on risk assessment, the decision was made to hold off until the litigation situation clarified itself. Shortly after that, on December 17th, the 6th U.S. Court of Appeals dissolved the stay against OSHA, and OSHA set new deadlines of January 10th for policy implementation and February 9th for the actual implementation of the mask and test protocol. Shortly thereafter, the Supreme Court said that it would hear oral arguments on the case, and kind of going through that process, it's like, well, we know we're going to have a final resolution on this in a relatively short period of time. Last week, the Friday the 7th, the Supreme Court held oral arguments and said that they would issue a ruling quickly. Monday the 10th, the OSHA ETS policy went into effect, although OSHA had said they would not take compliance actions if jurisdictions were showing, or companies were showing good faith effort, and we had certainly done that by devising a compliant policy. Then today at 3 p.m., just as I had finished up my briefing, the Supreme Court ruled in a 6-3 ruling to block the OSHA ETS mandate And a couple of highlights that I took from that order are as follows. The reasoning is the rules draw no distinction based on industry or risk exposure to COVID-19. COVID-19 is not an occupational hazard and can be spread at home and schools, during sporting events, and everywhere else that people gather. That kind of universal risk is no different from the day-to-day dangers that all face from crime, air pollution, or any number of communicable diseases. Permitting OSHA to regulate the hazards of daily life simply because most Americans have jobs and face these same risks while on the clock would significantly expand OSHA's regulatory authority without clear congressional authorization. So that is kind of the basis of the Supreme Court's actions. Well, while we were working through the OSHA situation, New York State announced on Friday, December 10th, that effective Monday, December 13th, there would be a indoor mask mandate, and basically it said that facilities have to be either 100% vaccinated, so not allowing any unvaccinated folks to work or visit there, or they had to be 100% mask wearing. And so the town implemented and briefed managers on the policy and employees on the policy prior to them coming to work on that Monday. And the policy was originally set to expire on January 15th, which is just around the corner. The governor announced the other day that the New York indoor mask mandate is extended for at least 2 more weeks through February 2nd. And then, we'll see what happens next. Overall, there have been, there's been vast majority of customers and visitors have been compliant, although there have been a few cases where, employees had to come kind of face-to-face with this public discussion over the issue of masking and, take appropriate steps to protect themselves and to, keep a compliant environment. Another thing that was going on in the COVID world in the last 2 weeks is the change in isolation and quarantine guidance. As you recall, when COVID originally came upon the scenes, the guidance was 14-day quarantine. Around Christmas of last year, it was modified to 10-day quarantine. It's been 10-day quarantine kind of up until last week. So December 24th, New York State issued some modified guidance that said for essential personnel, such as highway, sewer, police, and healthcare workers, that if they were fully vaccinated, they could limit their isolation period to 5 days if need be for making sure essential services were delivered. 3 days later, on the 27th, the CDC put out a recommendation saying that the 5 days should apply to all people regardless of vaccination status. I think that was a Friday, or that was midweek. The county stated that it would not follow those guidelines on the 3rd of January. On the 4th of January, CDC updated its recommendations, although primarily they just addressed what's called congregate settings, like schools, hospitals, jails, things where there's lots of people living together, nursing homes. Then on the 4th of January, New York State adopted the CDC regulations, and then on the 6th of January, the county adopted them. Basically what it is there's a 5-day protocol, or there's a 5+5 protocol. You isolate or quarantine for 5 days. At the end of that, you wear a mask for 5 days, but you can come back to work after 5. There's other details in there, which we've completed a flow chart, and I provided a copy of the flow chart there for you that contains pretty much the language from the health department, because there's a lot of if, then, else's, and that works very nice for math equations. And pick your own path storybooks, but it's kind of hard to administer, and hopefully this tool will help with that. So then just on the 11th of this week, New York State has said that local health departments no longer have to contact trace for COVID, which means that if you test positive, you won't be getting those phone calls that say, tell us who else you were with and exposed to, and we'll add them to the list. Basically, the county is now moved to a self-reporting model, and this will, one of the effects is this will help us with our staffing, because during this last peak, the health department obviously wasn't staffed for Omicron, and we would direct employees to go to the health department to either get a quarantine order or to be cleared from quarantine if they were fully vaccinated. And that used to take like 12 hours, then it got into like a couple of days. So now you go to the website, you self-report, you get your quarantine orders, and then that way we as an employer know exactly how long you should be out and when, according to the health department, you can come back to work. So what happens next? Who knows? But at least today we know that the OSHA ETS is not going to be happening next. Again, the New York State indoor mask mandate continues to be in place through the end of February 1st, and department heads and employees continue to face the challenge, staffing challenges due to absences, and quite frankly, concern for their safety over COVID exposures.
So I have a question with respect to this mask mandate and the differences in different situations, okay? In the situation I'm going to propose, or the example I'm going to give is you can walk into a restaurant and you have to have your mask on. As soon as you sit down, you can take your mask off, right? So I walk in here with my mask on, and I sit down, I have to keep it on though. So are those guidelines separate for restaurants than they are for the general public in different settings?
So Councilman Cahill, you bring up an excellent question about consistency, and the answer is it depends on which mandate we were talking about. So the
I'm
situation,
talking about the current one.
and what you described were the rules last year
Right.
under New York State. The rules right now are supposedly that if you go to a restaurant, you can only take off your mask in between bites of food. So I have not been to a restaurant recently to observe compliance with that.
I've seen him eat. You could never have your mask on.
Yeah. It's just fast
So,
and furious.
But I think that answer perhaps reinforces the purpose of your question. That there's a line between the science and the intent and reality, and they cross over in several situations.
Yeah, they do.
That's for the health department to defend and the policymakers to opine on.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
And I don't want us to ask you questions that are putting you in a position where it's outside of your expertise and it's speculative, but would you speculate that the reason the health departments are like, we're not going to be making these calls is it just, there's too many numbers. When you have 2,000 to 3,000 people testing positive, now exponentially the contact rate. I know that a year ago, when the seasonal spike went up, our testing was like 200 or 300 a day, and they were having a hard time keeping up then. How are they going to keep up to 2,000 or 3,000? Is that essentially why they said no more?
I would agree with you, and I'll speculate that there are two reasons that fall under the same category of too many cases to handle. I mean, one is a staffing issue. You can only flow so much through, so much water through a hose. The other is probably from a scientific standpoint. Contact tracing, the theory is that if you can identify sources and contagions, then you can limit the exposure of whatever the thing happens to be, whether it's tuberculosis or COVID-19. Well, with Omicron, it's basically everywhere, and it spreads easily enough and fast enough that by the time you make contact tracing calls, there's no point. Plus, with a reduced 5-day quarantine, it really, it's too late. And so it's, I believe the word is endemic instead of pandemic. So I will then conclude my amateur science, because now I'll get past any level of knowledge.
Sure.
I have nothing to add. Thank you, Brayton. This is an ever-changing landscape, and I certainly appreciate your staying on top of it and reporting to us.
All right, and probably like everybody in the world, I can't wait to not have to deal with this.
We're all there.
One last thing, I don't know if you call that this off the record, but as we're planning for our first town supervisors monthly meeting of 2022, some of the emails, texts, calls going around, unsolicited by me, some town supervisors said, "You're a lucky son of a gun, Flaherty. You got Brayton Conaters, your HR director, navigating you through this, what you just described." And I think we are pretty lucky at the town to have Brayton. Thank you.
Thank you. Please give me the names, because that way I can pay their invoices.
You will not get any names. All right, well, and he's a timely son of a gun too, because it is 5:45, and the second item in tonight's workshop is almost a continuation of last week's board meeting, where there ended up being probably an hour and 10-minute, pretty robust discussion. Chief Dennis Kohlmeyer, you did some presentation then. There was Q&A, there was a lot of back and forth, almost really turned into a pseudo workshop. And it culminated with, and I thanked at that time, Councilman Abbott said, you know, let's just table any resolution on this situation. Let's go to next week, being today. So here we are, and we have a presentation and discussion on future options and solutions for assistance at public events and/or traffic control. And this, I'm going to hand the baton over to, I think it's going to be a combination, Chief, of you and Brayton?
Potentially. I may punt some questions to him should there be human resources, civil service related questions. But.
Okay. That'd be great.
All right. So the first thing I want to start with is I put together a little PowerPoint to try to clarify what we're actually addressing. So I know this topic has a lot of emotion attached to it. There's been a lot of questions about value and cost, and I just want to, I guess, put it back out there to make sure everybody's understanding and aware of that this didn't originate as a result of questioning the value the special police bring to the town. It didn't originate with any kind of wrongdoing or issues with the performance of the special police. What this came down to was a continuation of trying to understand the protections and the coverage of the special police. And in order to understand those, we first started with the protections for injuries. And the fundamental question there was the volunteer versus employment question. And so that's where I started to dig into this. So I guess what I wanted to start with tonight is to cover what we're actually talking about is the problem. The problem, at least the way I see it, is that there's one fundamental issue. And there's a couple abbreviations here to kind of give you an idea of how they tie together, and then there's some supporting documents, because I think the other thing we're talking about here is trust. I think one of the things that happens when you have an emotional discussion like this is that people start to question the trust of the decision makers and the intent of the action that's being taken. So I guess I want to try to clarify that as much as possible tonight. So the first box talks about Town Law 158, which establishes the special police. There's a couple main elements to that, and I'll show you the actual section of law in a second so that people can see the source of it. The basic fundamentals are that the wording uses employ, provides constable power, says that the hiring and appointing must be done in accordance with civil service, and uses the word shall set compensation. The next set of boxes is the criminal procedure law, which at some point, I don't know when, established special police officers as peace officers. And again, there's a couple different labels of special police officers that I found in different wording, but it says specifically peace officers that are appointed under Town Law 158 are peace officers. So essentially what that does is it ties the title to the peace officer power. So when you have the original title that has constable in it, the state essentially upgraded those powers to peace officer powers under CPL 210. Executive Law 845 is the executive law that establishes a peace officer registry that every peace officer in New York State must be registered to by their employer, and it's run by the Department of Criminal Justice Services. So again, this is a wordy slide. My intent was to show the source of the information we're talking about because it's not necessarily readily available to everybody. It is available on the internet, but people don't necessarily know the right places to look. So the couple things to take out of there I highlighted in red, in my opinion. Basically it talks about a town with more than 5,000 people has the ability to employ temporary police officers from time to time, that they will be called special police officers, that it has the power of constables. The town board and serve at the pleasure of the town board, and the town board shall fix compensation, and that such special police shall be appointed in accordance with the civil service law and rules. So essentially, that starts the conversation about employee versus volunteer. All of the documentation from the origination of the special police, when they transitioned from auxiliary police in 1997, is focused on volunteers. And I think the reason that is that under the auxiliary police, which is under the civil defense provisions, they had to be volunteers. They could not be compensated. So in that section of law, the members of the organization couldn't be compensated, had to be volunteers. When it switches to special police, it appears it's the opposite way around, that they can't be volunteers, they must be employed, and the town board shall fix their compensation. So that's where we start to see it's not apples to apples, it's apples to oranges. Excerpt from the criminal procedure law, again, I think I highlighted it last week. There's 84 different subsections to peace officer statutes in New York State to establish people who are peace officers. Some of them are a little bit different than others. For example, auxiliary police, when they were in the peace officer, they're still here in the peace officer statute, but they're number 26. It specifically says their peace officer status is specific to activity during a declared time of natural disaster or civil defense or nuclear attack, and that the only other time they can exercise those powers is when they're on an authorized drill or training event that tests those particular criteria. As you see, the wording here is a little bit different. This is a general status as peace officers that isn't specific to any one category of performance. The powers of peace officers are under Section 220, which goes through powers of arrest, power to forcibly, up and to include deadly physical force, arrest people, return them to a court, issue appearance tickets, all the powers that come along with that. And again, in the peace officer registry that builds off of that, they specifically talk about employer. When I inquired to DCJS about how we view them as volunteers, and that we have them listed under workman's comp as voluntary police, they highlighted the section of law and reiterated that because it specifically says employ, they're not considered employed, they should be removed from the registry. So it brings us to the problem of the special police volunteer concept doesn't tie into the authority that was used to create the positions. All of the other questions that come along with it, as far as cost benefit, risk assessment, to me are secondary to the primary question of can special police be volunteers? And if they cannot be, what are the next actions that the town's going to take? Because the cost assessment, the risk assessment are all part of the future options. I'm sorry, I have one more slide here. When I further inquired about employed, they pushed me back to the civil service definition because I explained to them that we had the opinion from 1997 that Monroe County considered them to be exempt and weren't subject to the conditions of civil service. They reiterated back that that really can't be the case unless somebody actually creates a special police title in the exempt class. And then there's actually some provisions on that, even once that happens, about filling that after that point in time. And based on research that Brayton may be able to speak to better, there is no special police title in the exempt class of civil service. So therefore, the appointment isn't in accordance with civil service, even if the compensation set at 0 still considered them to be employees. If I summarized that correctly. So to me, that's the fundamental problem that the board's addressing is the status of the current structure. And then the second step of the problem is where do we go from here to either have volunteerism or have this resource at a reduced cost to the town to still have the functions that we were looking at before. So I guess that's my opening summary to open the discussion.
Okay, those three options that you have up there, I call those genres, actually, because they're very summarized up, but Chief, there's 30 pages of notes over the last 6 months of the different flow chart if-thens of configuring a volunteer structure. There's a ton of if-thens, benefits, risk assessment on paid non-peace officers.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing for a paid peace officer. Some of them have within them civil service aspects. Is that correct? I'll look to Brayton on that.
Yes, so from civil service standpoint, and then just for reference, I was the executive director to the Monroe County Civil Service Commission for 16 years. And so I have, I would say, a decent level of expertise in civil service, but not, there's always somebody who knows more. Civil service looks at employees, right? It draws from the New York State Constitution, and if somebody is employed, and for civil service, that means do they receive compensation other than reimbursements, okay? So it doesn't matter if you are on a zoning board and you get paid a fixed amount per meeting or per year, or whether you get paid per hour, or you're an annual salary, or you're paid out of the payroll system, or you're paid on a voucher. If you are paid, you are an employee or public officer, and you are covered by civil service law. And if you are not paid, then you're none of civil service's business. And so as volunteers, that's why civil service was very well aware that special police existed, but there is no job description in civil service for it because it was not a compensated position. Then you become an employee, you have to have a classification in civil service. The one that everybody thinks about is taking an exam. That's called competitive class. There are some other classes that don't require exams. But one of the key things is every position that is new, right? Every position that is born in the competitive class. And it cannot be removed from the competitive class, which means tested, unless that removal is approved by the local Civil Service Commission and the New York State Civil Service Commission. And it's been my experience that the New York State Civil Service Commission does not support removing positions from the competitive class except for in, very justified circumstances. And, so certain references in the town law to serving at will would not be persuasive to the New York State Civil Service Commission. I've seen that with things such as the town engineer statute. Separate from civil service, there's the issue of peace officer powers, and, well, maybe I'll hold off on that. So does that give you some kind of stuff on civil service you were looking for? I don't want to
Well,
make
it
it a
does.
civil service seminar.
I guess, and that's one of the reactions and the time that it'll take to reconstruct something that makes sense for the whole community. Civil service could elongate the process in certain options, which might eventually make the town and the people who want to serve on a force opt for a different option that is a shorter finish line to being deployed because it avoids civil service. That's wordy, but that's how I've seen it from looking at all the flow chart of if then, if then.
Civil service has a process for the classification of positions, and, it requires some time, like any government process, but if you want the position to be non-tested, it requires a lot more time, because it has to go through 2 deliberative bodies. Then there is the issue of once you have your position, if it's tested, then, well, if you have a position that's going to be tested, there's going to be qualifications for it. And, some people may meet those qualifications and some people may not meet those qualifications. Sometimes we'll get asked, I say we, because, sometimes they will get asked, can we grandfather somebody in under old qualifications? And they don't grandfather people in. You either meet the qualifications or you don't, and that's because the whole point of the civil service is not to grandfather people, it's to give everyone at the time equal access. Everyone who's qualified should have equal access to a publicly paid position. So that's why they don't do grandfathering. So then the other thing would be is that an exam would have to be scheduled and taken, and then if you don't pass the exam, well, you're not going to be in the position. If you do pass the exam, you have to be reachable according to the rule of 3. So, if you're a good test taker, you're okay. If you're not a good test taker, then you might not be reachable and employable. It's kind of like a hurdles race, and you got to jump over all the hurdles and to get to the end, to get to the finish line.
So just to throw a couple comments in on the chart I put up here, like you said, Mr. Supervisor, it's a very general chart. I felt like the best way to start was talking about basic fundamental categories, then talking about the options within them. There's challenges, I think, with each one that you look at, but as you look from left to right, they basically increase in authority and cost. Or the authority that's being granted to each position, and then potentially the cost of each position. So obviously the volunteer can be considered an employee. Paid non-peace officer, don't know what that authority looks like. That takes research. I don't know if that looks like a constable power or some other, basically would have to look for a position that would have the authority to perform the function the town board is looking to achieve from this group. Whether that's at the far right side, powers of arrest, or if that's down to non-arrest powers and community presence and traffic control and things like that. So again, as it moves from left to right, the authority level is increased and the cost of the positions is increased as well.
Well, Chief, I think I think you summed up in this PowerPoint about as succinctly as you can, considering I've been in on these meetings the last 6+ months, and it's a complicated situation. And I also like the fact that you referenced trust, and I totally understand this is an emotional situation. There is going to be trust factors involved in this. This is a group that has served this community for almost 70 years, either as auxiliary police or in 1997 over to special police. And it's funny because along those same lines, I've always felt, Chief, that within the last 6 months, we've been trying to take a can-do attitude toward this. And I always liked, and I don't know who's seen the movie Apollo 13, there's a scene in that where Ed Harris's character sits at a conference table in Houston and dumps a bunch of stuff out there and says to these engineers, you need to make this out of that stuff or those astronauts can't come home. And they all say, oh, it can't be done, it can't be done. And Harris pounds his fist and says, you figure out, I don't want to hear it can't be done. You figure out how it can be done. Now, I don't know how much of it was Hollywood, but they ended up making the contraption and the astronauts got home. Not to be corny, but that's to me been our compass the whole time. As we didn't go looking for these problems actually kind of dumped themselves in our lap based on just what's happened the last couple of years. And I guess there has been a long-standing discussion between the special police leadership and the town leadership of, we need some clarity on what kind of coverage we have. And Dennis, it looks like, you took that question seriously, and when you started to go and get the answers, some of the things that have been mentioned today came out. And, from that standpoint, I still think, as different hurdles came up through this process, it still was we're going to figure out a way to get this done. The police want a presence. The community wants a presence. The people in this room who have been on the special police force, they want to be involved in something for their community at traffic control or event presence. I think the town board would like to have that. I know I would. And even to the point when you think can-do attitude, Chief, I think at one point, Stream of Consciousness, and I text you at like 9:30 at night and said, hey, can we put them under the volunteer firemen? Thinking, hey, that could be how we could do it. So it was always a thought process, how do we do it? And we were trying to think how to do it. So I'm not sure if I know what else to say about that as far as how we got to this point. Look, and like I said, I appreciate the emotion. If anything, over the last couple of weeks, I've heard and seen and, what I call pushback on this. And the word that kept coming out is disrespectful. If the board does something that's disrespectful. And it's funny, one person's garbage dump is another person's castle. I do understand how it could be perceived as disrespectful based on the timing and all that, even though I think it is somewhat chronicled that the special police leadership have been involved for the last 6+ months in us vetting the problem and all that. But the pushback that this town board is getting now, Mr. Kohlmeyer told me at a meeting on Tuesday, January 4th, that there's been 3 injuries on special police in the last 20 years. And by God's grace, none of them have been serious. Is that correct, Mr. Kohlmeyer?
It was over longer than 20, but yes.
Okay. I'm going to tell you right now, Mr. Kohlmeyer, if I had a crystal ball, first of all, life would be a lot easier, right? But if I could look into a crystal ball and know the next 20 years that deploying the special police out there at traffic control and events, nothing would happen, I would tell this board, I think we should just get them back out there and be done with this, right? But I don't have a crystal ball. And so therefore, if we know what we know now, and we put you out there on the street at public events with what we know now, and something happens to one of the officers, or something happens to one of the citizens in an interaction with one of the special police officers, I can assure you that the pushback on this town government will be tenfold what it is now. And I will say this, that pushback at that time would be deserved, indefensible. We knew, and we put them out there. How we would be portrayed at that point, I don't know. Did we put profit and money over safety? I can't be a party to that. I'm only one vote, but I cannot be a party to putting money over safety. Safety of the officers, safety of our citizens. I'm going to get off my soapbox. I don't want to do another 27-minute, right, Patty? I don't want that. Trust is one of those things that I get a title as town supervisor. So I meet you and you're going to trust and respect me day one? That's not how life works. Trust is earned by bridges of experience that you cross. So I'm hopeful that over the next couple weeks and months, the actions and the bridges of experience that we cross will take that trust issue and throw it away for the people who potentially have a trust concern. What is the intent, like Chief said, of what we're trying to do right now? Is there something that is nefarious that we're not talking about? There isn't. I want to get this force back out there. I want them representing the community. It's a pride of the community. It's a jewel of the community. Can't endorse it in its current structure.
I have a question, Mr. Supervisor, if I could, please. For those that weren't able to watch the meeting where we started this discussion off as to what the chief had discovered with respect to coverage, Chief, could you please articulate that for the people that are viewing for the first time today so that they're aware of what the board, what you had discovered when you started looking into the insurance coverage? And that's a topic that has brought us to where we are right now.
Yeah, and so that was actually the first layer that we started with. The coverage was the question that was brought up. And so essentially I'll give it my best layman's terms. As an employee, you're covered by workman's comp, and the coverage helps protect not only the injury treatment, but also loss of wage protection if there's a disability associated with it. The way the special police are currently configured as volunteers, the workman's comp coverage extends for the injury treatment itself, but not any loss of wage protection. And so if by performing a function for the town, they are unable to perform their, for lack of a better word, outside employment, whatever their professional life is, the workman's comp coverage does not consider loss of wage protection because they're not receiving compensation from the town. If they were receiving compensation from the town, their outside employment plus their town employment would also be put together to consider that loss of wage. So essentially, the protection is lack of loss of wage protection. There was a supplemental policy that was purchased to try to supplement that should there be an injury. What we discovered by looking into it is that it's a very meager policy. It has a $5,000 death benefit, maximum of $10,000 and $100 a week coverage. The first attempt that I had was to try to get that raised by the provider, and that was the maximum coverage it would extend based on the job description. And my my belief there is that it's because their expectation is that workman's comp, because the peace officers need to be employees, that workman's comp would cover the primary burden that would come with the injury.
And Chief, can I just add something else? That's part of the risk assessment for the officers out there. Another part of the risk assessment is that the peace officer bylaws or rules give a peace officer certain authorities to do things, let's say up to a level of 10. The town board, by resolution a few years ago, decided to cap the things that they could do in force and all that at like a 5. Is that a good example?
Yeah, so I guess I can't speak to what the specific limitations are. I can tell you from the documentation and the meeting I was at when it was particularly about the OC spray and batons that were being issued, that the intent of those were for officers to defend themselves and not to use them to in effect arrest or to take somebody into custody. That the direction from the chief at the time was that there was no enforcement action to be taken by the special police, that it was to report and not intervene unless there was a life safety issue for somebody. So it's a separation between the authorized powers from the local government and authorized powers from the state government.
Okay. And I'm trying to simplify down a complicated issue. I call it an indemnification gap. That God forbid an officer goes out and does something to one of our citizens, acting in their best interest, but they do a 7 on the scale of 1 to 10 as a peace officer. Now they're able as a peace officer to go up to 10, but the town board said, no, you can only go up to 5. So if that citizen has injuries or something and they sue, if it was in the scope of what the town said they were authorized to do, we would indemnify with our town insurance for the officer. But if it's seen that it was above what the town authorized them to do, the officer is on his or her own, which would probably cause financial destruction potentially. And that's another thing that I just was like, well, this is crazy. We're an accident, no pun intended, waiting to happen that will be to the detriment of our special police officers and their families. So, does that
Thank you for doing that.
fully
Yes.
answer? Now, I'll tell you what, I want to just give I want to read off the motions that I would like to make tonight, just so everybody hears them. We're not going to vote on them right now, because I appreciate that there are members and leaders of the special police in the room tonight, and I certainly want to give them an opportunity to speak and or ask questions. But here is what I'm proposing as the 2 resolutions, 2 motions that I would like to make tonight in sequence. I want to make a motion to dissolve the current structure of the Webster Police as of 11:59 p.m. on Friday, January 4th, 2022. I then want to make a motion, assuming that one passes, I want to make a motion to have Deputy Town Supervisor Patty Cataldi and Town Supervisor Tom Flaherty research future options for traffic control and or presence at public events, and to report back to the town board by March 24th of 2022. That's a town board workshop that night. I've used the word at last week's meeting on the 6th. I used this term when I met with the special police for 2 hours on Tuesday the 4th. Urgency. Urgency is, how do you show action of urgency? Urgency is a word, but action is ultimately going to decide whether there was urgency. I'm proposing that between tonight, the 13th, and the 24th of March, which is a little over 2 months, that Deputy Town Supervisor Cataldi and myself spearhead that effort, and we would utilize at our I shouldn't say disposal, Chief, you'd be in on that. Brayton, you'd be in on that. There's been plenty of people involved in this in the last, labor attorneys, civil service people. We would pull from resources, the leadership of the current special police. Collaborative effort, not in a vacuum, not in a silo, because there's gotta be an answer that really 4 parties, I think that's right, have to benefit. The officers, they have to have something that we feel as though puts them out there in a safe position. The community is the police. Dennis, I believe you. You say, I want this for the police force. I want some, organization that can assist the police, if you want to call it that. I don't know if that's the right term. And the town board, who ultimately has to adopt or whatever some structure. Is the structure make sense today? And does it make sense for the next 20 years? Is it something that that organization can recruit to and feel as though there would be people that would want to come to that organization? Off the top of my head, Patty, that would be our mission statement of those 4 organizations. And that 3 genres right there, there will be things that are work adversely against each other. Well, this is good for the police, but it's not good for the officer in the whatever the new organization is called. This is good for the officer in the new organization, but not so good for the community. It has risk to it. It's a task, but I feel as though we would do it, and we would come back on the 24th of March and give what we found, and also hopefully it's something that what is presented and what is proposed, hopefully by then, is something that the parties that I just mentioned all are advocating. So that's what I'm proposing. And with that in mind,
I just want to add that I think that the reason you're choosing me to be on this, to handle this task with you, is not A, I'm being favored, or B, I'm being punished. It's that I am the liaison to the police department from the board, so it makes sense that I would be working on this with you.
do you think that Barry Dean is sitting home tonight
He's
saying,
going, whew!
because
Yes.
previous Councilman Dean served as the police department liaison. He was at the table on a lot of these meetings throughout 2021. And if he was still on the board, he probably would still be the liaison to
Right.
police. And yes, Patty, he would have been who I proposed to,
Yes.
spearhead that. So I'm glad you made that designation.
And if we do set that date, we will deliver by that date.
Well, that's why when I put it out there, I'm like, there might be discussion like too far out, too soon.
I think it's probably a fair amount of time for those who are looking at possibly having their organization dissolved. It looks like a long time, but I would hope that when you've seen the challenges that we're facing, you realize that I don't want to promise you that we can do this in 2 weeks, because that's impossible. I think we're being realistic with the time.
Bless you.
Joe?
Right here, you want to go up to the front?
Oh, you got to go up to the podium, my friend.
Go to the podium, okay.
We wouldn't be able to see you on TV or really hear you at home if you weren't there.
Okay, great. My name is Joe Monachino. I've been with the Special Police Unit for over 3 decades. I was past chief before Chief Mike Sherlin came in. So I have a couple of questions, a couple of comments, and then I'll turn it over to Chief Mike Sherlin. And, I really appreciate, Dennis, everything that you've done. Obviously, this is a big turning stone, not only for the special police and peace officers in Webster, but this is going to affect the whole state, rightfully so. So hopefully we can be the ones that are breaking the groundwork here for the state. Having said that, I just have a couple questions. One is, you talk about the workman's compensation, and then they would cover any loss of wages. So that loss of wages is not what our real day job is per se. Those are the only wages that whatever we decide upon, the town board decides upon, paying us that hourly wage. That's what will be covered. Is that correct?
When you say you will be covered,
So you're saying the workman's compensation, say in an event we get hurt, excuse me. So-
you're talking currently.
I'm sorry?
You're talking about like currently, right now, if you were activated and got hurt.
Yeah, no, I'm saying, once the new structure comes into play and now we're paid as part-time, whatever you want to call it, we get an hourly wage. So workman's compensation would only be then for whatever those lost wages based on that role, that new role.
No.
It's not,
No, if you're receiving a wage,
okay,
no matter how minimal here with the town, they take into account your other income as
Okay.
well. And that's the issue, is that by not receiving a wage from the town, it excludes the possibility of including the other wage in the loss of wage compensation.
Okay.
So once you receive a wage here, whether it's significant or minimal, it opens the window to have the other wage also included in the loss of wage calculation.
okay, good. Thanks for clarifying that.
Yep.
Yeah, just a couple comments I have that, we have 18 officers now that are fully trained with peace officer status. I help with some of the training at the PSTF on Scottsville Road. And then obviously we always train the officers that whatever the town board tells us those powers are that we have as peace officers, those are what we have to follow. So what I'm hoping here, the end result is try to retain that expertise, the talent that these current officers have, and also as we go to solicit new applications into the new organization, that, we continue to have people that are well-trained to join the new organization. So I just want to, as I know we're looking at this March 24th deadline, it'd be great, I think our peak season starts in the spring anyways, as far as what is needed out there with, with the public. But there's a lot at stake here. There's a lot of opportunities that we want to try to salvage the best that we can so we can move forward as quickly as possible. But, I know insurance is a big deal, but I just want to point out some of the cost savings that we obviously provided to the town over the past since 1997. And it's a big number. It's between $3.6 million and $4.8 million. If you break that down by an hourly wage that we'd have to pay an overtime officer. So we have these dedicated volunteers that live in the town of Webster, and that's a requirement, at least in the current special police organization, that you live in the town of Webster. I know some of the other organizations out there, you don't have to. You can live in any place in the county. So that's one of the advantages that we have. So my ask is that, let's come up with a solution altogether, something that makes sense for everybody. Obviously, the citizens of our town, the police department, obviously we serve at the pleasure of the town board, but let's try to retain the best that we can of these current 18 officers. And just talking to them, and the chief will explain a little bit, we're going to lose quite a few of them, obviously. And I think that the peace officer certification and the authority that we have when we're out there doing what we need to do, including directing traffic, is very important to our organization, current organization.
Joe, before you leave the podium, obviously, people are watching at home, and in the future, people will go back and listen and watch this video. So, did you say $3.8 million?
Yeah, so I'm saying over since 1997.
Okay, and I want to just make sure, because obviously, there's handouts, there's PowerPoints, that number came out of the air,
No, it's just
and
basically,
I believe that you came up with a calculation. Can you describe to me how you came up with that number over 25 years?
Sure, I can do that. So just based on, the hours that we perform, that includes, I took an average. We used to report our hours on a yearly basis, and we broke it down into court security, we broke it down into details, which is, out there with public events, and then also crowd control. So I took an average. It was about 1,800 hours per se, give or take, per year, and basically multiplied that by an average of like $60 to $80 per hour, $60 to $80 per hour that we would have to pay an overtime officer for. Just a kind of an approximation number.
Okay, so of the 1,800 hours, you said you broke it out by court security, events, and traffic control. How much on a typical $1,800 year was court security?
We did probably, of 1,800, we probably did 250 to 300 hours of that.
You did 250 to 300 hours a year of court security. Maybe I don't understand the point of reference of court security that we came from. Because I think everybody now knows we have a third party that's armed doing court security, which is a unintended consequence, I think, of bail reform and all that. But did you, I thought, at least since I've been here, that there were 2 special police officers at every court hearing or that the town had. Is that correct?
We had, we tried to have 2, that was our goal.
Okay.
Sometimes we had 1 person there.
So, and Charlie, I know that we don't have the judges here. We just went through this, Chief. Wasn't there's a Tuesday or a Monday, a Wednesday, a Thursday, I mean,
Yes, I'm not sure which courts,
Yeah, we just covered the Wednesday court. I mean, I know there was multiple days, but our function was just the Wednesday, either morning or afternoon court, and then there was some kind of small claims court that we also
I got you.
covered.
Now that's the part, and I guess I didn't realize, okay. So the other court dates, small claims and all that stuff, had no security?
Correct.
Okay.
You were there more for the criminal type cases or the?
Yep, we were. Yeah, so I mean, the cost that I figure is between $150,000 to $200,000 a year, and I just, multiply that, I would pass 24 years, and that's how I got that number. But it was a range between that $60 to $80 an hour, approximation. Again, I guess the number, it's a big number, no matter what exactly
Yeah,
what
no,
number
and
it is.
and I'm glad you clarified, because I just learned something new tonight. It's what happens when you assume. I thought our benchmark of when we had special police doing the court security, they were doing court security at every single court date throughout the week. They were just doing the Wednesday with the district attorney and the public defender, and then potentially Fridays when trials and all that. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, that proves the way the world has changed, huh, Dennis? Because now we have to have security armed at every single one of them. Quite a world we live in, huh, Dolly? And this is all, I mean, and I appreciate what you said, and I'm an accountant in my background, so. That's a big number, $3.8 million. I think if the town had to go back to that point, first of all, we wouldn't be spending that kind of money, because like the court security, I think we're right now at like $40 an hour, or flat.
Yeah.
So that's in 2022 dollars, we're paying $40 to an armed security guard. So I appreciate the point of reference you used, $60 to $80 of police overtime. I get it. I
Yeah,
get it. And I
to
see where you're
clarify,
coming
I'm
from.
not including court
Right.
in there. We put court in that number, but the majority of our events are traffic control,
Right.
crowd control, so.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that Patty and I will try to have as one of our compasses, is that, listen, I appreciate, without a doubt, there was money saved by the town budget by having dedicated volunteers do these things. Joy, I hope you know, and I know you a little bit, $3.8 million, that was a number that was thrown out in just kind of in a vacuum. That will choke a horse.
Yeah, it's a
Well,
big number.
We're going to go forward and make sure that we're going to try to not spend $3.8 million, because all of a sudden we have a structural issue where we can't utilize this anymore.
Understood.
So there is going to have to be a way that we do this going forward that isn't going to replicate us having to pay $3.8 million in today's dollars over what you just said was saved from 1997 to 2022.
Right.
Anyway, well, thank you.
Yeah, so just to end of it, it's absolutely a big number, but the main thing is that, hey, how can we utilize the expertise, not only starting March 24th or whatever we decide to make this active here, but moving forward into the future, 10, 15, 20 years from now, So we have some expertise. I mean, obviously, we need to look at the exempt class and try to get something fixed on the, under civil service laws, right? Not only for us, but for the whole people in New York State, because it's like I said before, it's going to affect everybody. So having said that, I think building a unit, trying to maintain as many as we can of the current officers is very important. and especially with the training and the expertise that they currently have. So that's why I wanted to make sure that once, we all sit together and work on a new organization, that obviously that peace officer status and certification that we have is very, very important, because we spend, now it's 160 hours, so a lot of people spend not only to be trained for that, but on a yearly basis, they get trained for, proper use of tools and so forth. And then just being, helping with instructing at the PSTF, the Public Safety Training Facility, is that we want to continue to add to that, So in this day and age, again, with, trying to get people to volunteer, even if they get paid, is very hard to do. So if we have a resource, retain it, continue to build it for the future, and utilize, our expertise to help what these local police departments, right, across the county, the state, the local level, and what we can do to help them out. That's what it's all about. That's what gets me excited and wants me to contribute and do all that stuff. So,
Thanks, Joe.
yep.
I'm Mike Charlotte. I'm the current chief of Special Police Unit here in Webster, and I've been involved with the Special Police for about 17 years. I've been acting as the chief for probably the last 7. Joe worked in that role for 10 years before me, and our combined service, I think Joe said he's got over 30 years. If you add me and Joe up, we still don't come close to former Chief Kohlmeyer here. So I decided to have a small group of us. I pulled from the resources of us all having some experience being the leader of the group to be available to the town board and the chief of police to figure out a path forward for our guys and women. So this really started about 3-4 years ago when I started questioning what kind of insurance coverage we have, and looked into the policy, and then Chief Kohlmeyer really ran with that, and that's really the origination of this. The other concern I raised starting just a little bit later was around safety of officers and in these changing times. So we've evolved, we've got more training, probably about six to 7 times more hours of training at the academy than I did when I originally joined only 17 years ago, and we need to continue to get more training. We're willing and able to do that. So express that because, for example, things that I saw at town court, we have declining membership, and for our officers to take time off from their paid day jobs to serve in the court was getting increasingly difficult. Typically, court was covered by 1 officer instead of 2. So we, in the last few years, have gone from about 25 officers down to the current 18. So I had some concerns there as we thought the risk was increasing and our coverage ability and availability was decreasing. So those concerns were expressed, and they're being addressed right now. Joe Monachino mentioned he used an average of about 1,800 hours per year in his calculations about what we think we're saving the police department. I would say probably 5 or 6 years ago that number was closer to 2,300 or 2,400 hours per year, but because of declining membership, we've been covering details with less people out in the field, and those hours have kind of correspondingly decreased. I would also just want to say that our officers, past and present, are the biggest supporters in my view of the police department. We're enthusiastic. We get up all hours of the night to cover call-outs when needed, and we hope to see that that continue in the future. This is our community. As Chief Kohlmeyer mentioned at one point, that our peace officer status would allow us to transfer to a different community. That's not our desire. We're from Webster, we love Webster, and we want to continue to serve Webster. I think our officers, as I've spoken to them over the last a couple of weeks have expressed that they do want to retain peace officer status. That's important to us. All of us have worked hard to achieve that status, and we would like to utilize that in some way going forward. The other part of it is, I appreciate what Councilperson Cataldi said earlier, that there's a sense of urgency, and the March 24th date is now on the table. Our members are looking for that leadership and a path forward. To be honest with you, the morale is starting to sink, and I want to retain these officers that we have because it's especially hard to recruit right now. So I don't want to, say everything that former Chief Monachino just expressed. I want to emphasize some of it. And, if there's any questions for us, let me know. Gene, did you have some comments you want to add tonight? All right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike.
Hello, my name is Gene Kohlmeyer. I live over at 231 Oakwood Lane and been a member for a long time of the police department, of the special police, and the auxiliary police before then. I agree with everything that's been said here. I don't need to say an awful lot to reiterate what they were talking about, but I do want to cover one additional point, and that is that the special police and the auxiliary police before them were a part, I mentioned this last week, of where life is worth living. One of the things that we provided was a zero cost or very low cost, if you look at the equipment side of it, for events that wouldn't otherwise be covered by anybody. Regular police department, other towns in this county, they don't cover things like somebody wants a block party. We've done those. They get permission to close the road down for a block party. We take care of the barricades and things for that. So there's a number of those kinds of lower level social events. Crop walk in a village, we acted as crossing yards for that. So it's not something you would normally detail a police officer for as a paid employment for handling those particular details. So I just wanted to make the point that we are a community a resource that has been used to enable the where life is worth living part. That's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kohlmeyer.
Can I talk about duties and responsibilities for a minute?
Sure.
I think it's important to give a little context. You can go ahead and sit down. A little bit of context to the public that's watching or listening about the duties and responsibilities of the special police, and then potentially what the duties and responsibilities are moving forward for whatever the unit looks like in a future state. I would break down the duties and responsibilities to three different general categories. One of those is court security, one of those is traffic control for either emergency or pre-planned events, and the third one, I don't know if I would use the label crowd control. I would probably label it more like uniform presence at public events. So that I think crowd control sometimes has a negative connotation to it. And like it was pointed out, not all of the events that the special police covered would be covered by police officers. I think some examples were highlighted there. So the one I really want to talk about is the court security. And court security is kind of a soft term for what the special police were performing. What they were actually doing is a weapon screening station. They were running a magnetometer and they were running a hand wand station to stop weapons from going into the courtroom. I don't think anybody in this day and age would advocate for one unarmed person to be manning a weapon screening station, and that's why the town moved away from that. So that wasn't a lack of performance by the special police. That was a risk assessment based on the duties and responsibilities and how the roles in the world has changed, like the supervisor keeps referencing for the last 2 years. So the court security concept obviously saved the town money. Obviously, it was a heavy lift for the special police as volunteers, but I think it was rightly recognized as something that didn't fit that model anymore. So when we talk about the next steps for this unit, we're really talking about the traffic control and we're talking about the uniform presence at events. So I just want to make sure that that's on the table and clear to the public that's watching and listening, that hasn't been part of some of the previous conversations.
Thank you, Chief.
The other thing I want to mention, and Chief Sharlin, you mentioned that, morale is sinking in the special police. And we began the meeting with talking about trust. And there are 3 of you here tonight, which means there's 15 who are not. And I would hope that you would convey to them our intent to figure out how to make this work so that they might gain a little more trust in this board as well. I just hope that you take that message back.
Jenny?
Is there any other town that have special police that we can try to see and learn from them? And, their process or stuff like that? Does anyone know?
Yes, Gates, Ogden, and Greece all have special police departments here in North Carolina.
I believe we discussed this at the last meeting, Chief, that you have been in discussions with the chiefs of the surrounding areas with respect to what we're going through from a standpoint of, civil service, coverage, and those things. And if I understood you correctly, the feedback that you got was that they are looking to Webster as we're somewhat blazing the trail as far as what their path forward will be.
Yeah, so I talked to one of the chiefs just this week about what their status was. They're having the same conversations with their legal counsel now. They also consider their special police to be volunteers, so they're in the same position we're in. I talked regarding potential paths forward to how they're being compensated and things like that. And again, they're in the same boat we are. There is no path that's been highlighted for us by anybody else.
Bill?
Well, we're in a predicament that's very difficult for this board. The special police have been here since I've been in this town, and that's 30 plus years. I hate to see us say we got to disband them, but technically, under the current situation, they cannot operate in the current configuration. Peace officers have to re-register, but they have a 2-year window.
Either 2 or 4. 2 is the minimum, depending on their length of service.
Okay, so if we didn't get anything accomplished until March 24th, they would still be eligible to maintain their certifications as peace officers if that's the direction we are looking to go. Based on what I'm seeing here, they have to be paid by the town to be peace officers. That's going to be an issue that needs to be looked at and discussed.
Bill, I'm just going by, and Chief, I'm glad you put it up there. Obviously, Joe Monachino and Mike Charlin, they both summed up their statements with they want to have peace officers still foundational. There is one option of the genres up there that is a peace officer, and I think it says paid.
All right.
So
that's an issue that we need to think about as a town board.
Yep.
Because right now we don't fund them with anything except equipment.
Correct. And I know that there's a Friends of the Special Police, a 501c3. I don't know. I've never looked at the 990s and seen if they've got $1 million in the bank or if they've got $5 in the bank. So.
Sure.
This is approximately $5,000 came from the community. Typically, organizations that we've helped out make a donation, they raise some money. We've never spent any of the money. We've just accumulated that amount. It sits in the bank.
Okay. Anything else? Because I don't want to be redundant, but I said there was 2 motions that I would like to make, and one kind of cascades off the other. I'm going to say it again, and I just want to explain when I said that I would make a motion to dissolve the current structure of the Webster Police.
Special police.
Special police.
Sorry, yeah.
The devil is in the details here.
Okie Webster Special Police, as of 11:59 PM on Friday, January 14th, 2022. The reason for the time and the date is that re-registry is January 15th for a municipality for certified peace officers. Is that correct, Chief?
Yes, sir.
So, to me, that goes under the urgency thing. Bill did a nice job of summing up the fact that, okay, you're still a peace officer, the 18 people on the force. What we hope that they hang tight, work with us, see what we can come up with by mid-March. Busy season comes in the spring, it could be really nice, right? And certainly, if we get this figured out in a couple of months, having a 2 to 4 year window of your current certification as a peace officer, we're not even close to putting you into harm's way. And I say that because, you know, Joe, I know when we talked on January 4th, there would be pressure, some of this coming from a non-trust issue, and I understand that for people, if we don't deploy you out there, you've been on the sidelines since September. If somebody's like, I want to get off the sidelines, they're going to go hang their shingle, their certification in Greece or Ogden or whatever. That's their prerogative. And I get it. I hope they don't. And I think our actions will ultimately determine if they do, or if they do, if they come back, no matter what happens. So I just wanted to make sure people understand, because it's a very specific time and day. So, other than that, Patty already described why how'd you describe it, Patty? That you either got the honor or you got
I was either being favored or punished.
You got the short straw or you were being favored. Well, it was neither. It would have been Barry Dean if he was still on the board and he was still the police liaison. So that's the logic behind Patty. And I'd like to think that the logic behind me as the town supervisor is obvious. So, if nobody has any other questions or comments, and I don't think they do, Dolly? I'm going to make the motion. Okay. I make a motion to dissolve the current structure of the Webster Special Police as of 11:59 PM Eastern on Friday, January 14th, 2022.
Second.
Supervisor Flaherty?
Aye.
Councilwoman Cataldi?
Aye.
Councilwoman Wynn?
It's very difficult, but I'm hoping that, we will find a solution for everyone, and thank you very much for all your services. We deeply appreciate it. You're part of our town, and we don't forget that. Yes.
Councilman Cahill?
Aye.
Councilman Abbott?
Reluctantly, aye.
I think it was a reluctant vote across the table here.
Agreed. Just saying, I'm not,
Yep.
I don't see any option.
I'm more interested in getting knee-deep, waist-deep, neck-deep, whatever you want to call it, in the next one. And I make a motion to have Deputy Town Supervisor Patty Cataldi and Town Supervisor Tom Flaherty authorized to research future options for traffic control and/or public event presence, and to report back to the town board by Thursday, March 24th, 2022.
Second.
Supervisor Flaherty?
Aye.
Councilman Cahill?
Aye.
Councilman Abbott?
Aye.
Councilwoman Cataldi?
Aye.
Councilwoman Wynn, excuse me.
Aye.
I don't have anything else on our agenda tonight. This was a little bit heavier of a workshop than usual. Ginny, you're a little bit indoctrination by fire. Any final words from anybody?
No. We have a possible snowstorm coming. So I want everybody to keep an eye on the weather and be mindful if our highway crews are out there plowing the roads, give them all the space they need. And should it come to a snow event, be careful out there.
All right, well, that concludes tonight's workshop. Thank you, everybody.